Hey, welcome to a very special episode of Lab the Podcast. We get to be here tonight with a wise and kind and gifted artist who's become a friend. Gina White is with us, and you can probably hear rumblings of noise. There's a live audience in the room, so the audience, there you go. Isn't that fun?
It
I
is
love that we get to
fun.
be out. We've got great artists, great friends, and that includes everybody in the audience. So we're so excited tonight. Gina White is a beekeeper, a
Mhm.
self-taught encaustic artist living in St. Petersburg, Florida, with her husband, two children, Hazel the dog, and a multitude of bees at Dickens
Mhm.
Bee Farm. Gina has a passion for bringing art into the community. She's active with Florida Wax, a chapter of the International Encaustic Artists, and regularly exhibits her work and teaches about encaustic painting. Gina is committed to strengthening the local Tampa Bay art community. She's the co-founder and past director of St. Pete First Art Collective and is currently co-chair and curator at St. Thomas Art Project, a not-for-profit gallery and art center that supports local artists and brings their work to new audiences. Gina also serves as a juror for numerous community-based art organizations. So practitioner and juror in all things. Welcome, Gina White.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Zach, for having me. I'm honored and privileged to be part of this. V3 does amazing things, and I'm just honored to even be asked to be part of this. Thank you.
Well, the honor is ours. And really, we were just talking, I think it was February, that it started with a phone call. We'll get into that phone call and what our idea was when we had that phone call. But I thought we would start with beekeeping because we have
'Cause
to.
it's fun,
Yeah, why would we
right?
not start with beekeeping? I always love an opportunity when you get to know somebody who obviously has such grace and talent that you can look at quickly, that we forget that there's a lifetime that goes into making that artist who that artist is. And I couldn't help but notice beekeeping was at the top of the list in the bio. So tell us about Dickens Bee Farm.
Well, it's funny because they encaustic, which is painting with wax, and the beekeeping kind of morphed separately. And I guess I just gravitated toward both. But I've always wanted to keep bees, but I live in St. Pete, so I don't live in a farm or any place that bees would probably be a good idea. But they have made some new technologies and advancements. And so backyard beekeeping is a kind of a big thing now. And we decided to get some bees. And our dog Dickens passed away. And so we made a little Dickens bee farm in honor of him. And it's been so much fun to learn about the bees. They're very humbling
Mm.
because just when you think you know what bees should be doing, they tell you otherwise. And as part of nature, I'm kind of a nature geek. I don't know if you've figured it out by some of the pieces out here. It's just every little thing that the bees do. It's complex. It's really teaches you that things in this world are full of way more complexity that we know, and it also helps me realize that some of my things that I get so excited about or upset about really don't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing to think we could have a whole second episode on just beekeeping.
Yes.
It's literally the most important maybe conversation next to art that we could have, because without bees being bees, right?
Mhm.
And with urbanization and all the things, we're losing some of the cross pollination. So we'll come back to that, because in
Okay.
a way, what you're doing is that cross pollinating and inviting us to take and be a part of something here that then creates something over there. And without that working together,
Mhm.
life and beauty don't just happen in the world. So
No.
there is a
Mhm.
beautiful parallel
It's
there.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that little thread to Dickens and the name.
Yeah.
If you go back further, would you be surprised that you're keeping bees, or were there childhood? If you look back as a child, were you outside playing with bees and finding your way in nature? Were you always in nature? Here's why I ask, because I love books, as I mentioned. And when we first met, you and I bonded immediately because we had
Mhm.
both read a book called The Hidden Life of Trees. Has
Mhm.
anybody else read The Hidden Life of Trees?
So
There's
amazing.
like six of us, I think, that read The Hidden Life of Trees. So you know one when you find them. But
Yes.
was that always a part of your story, that love of nature, beekeeping? Was that who you were when you were 10?
No, not at all. So it's interesting as I learn, and you're talking about before about the books that you all have read and how you grow and learn through those. I read one book, took me down a rabbit hole, and the more I'm reading and the more I'm learning about nature and the just the vitality of it and just the complexity that we just are touching the surface of, it's I have a visceral reaction to it. It just gets me so excited, and that's why a lot of the times I paint, because I have a much better ability to get some of my feelings out with the paintbrush rather than the words. I after a certain point, just I don't have the words because I feel like it overwhelms me.
Yeah. I noticed that we were invited to come and see some of Gina's pieces, and my wife Cami, who's in the back, and I love you. We were walking around Gina's show, and I was amazed at the poetic side, the
Mm.
musicality, the nature, the deeply rooted in scripture. Like it's all of that together. When did you first notice that all of those parts of you were going to be expressed visually? When did you start painting? When did you start being drawn to this medium?
Well, there's a lot of questions
Yeah,
there.
it's like,
Uh, so I took sort of an unorthodox route to my artwork. I had always been interested in art, and uh, but I didn't study it. I was a speech pathologist in college, but I'd always taken a few art classes and always dabbled in. But in 2003, I was pregnant with my second child, my son, and I developed ulcerative colitis. My Mike and I had eaten some bad clams, and I was in my third trimester, and we both got sick, and I didn't get better. And I was homebound and bedridden for about 7 years. And there were a couple of times where we thought I wasn't going to make it, got down to 80 pounds and multiple hospital visits. And if it weren't for my family who are sitting in that third row there, amazing, supportive, fantastic family, I don't know what I would do because I also had a 2-year-old running around at the time, a 2-year-old and a newborn. And my amazing family, I'm going to get choked up,
mm,
they supported me. But back to your question, there's only so much TV you can watch in 7 years, and it gets really bad. Some of that TV is just awful. So I got back to, what can I do? And I started sketching and started really just expressing my feelings and processing my pain through art. And I have the most amazing husband who's supportive and really encouraged me in that process. And some of my early paintings are reflective of that. My brother in law and sister in law have one of my earlier paintings that I used to process through that called My Body is a Cage. And that was one of the things that inspired me on that is the song by Arcade Fire.
mm,
And the piece, I don't know, for those that are listening to the podcast, you can't see it, but in that room back there, that piece was called Awake My Soul. And that was when I first was able to get out of the house and just leave and be outside. And so it really just, again, was a way for me to express my feelings through the paintbrush that I couldn't probably discuss or express verbally. And so I, I'm up and about now, and a lot of the times now I process some of the ideas of things that I've read, books, The Hidden Life of Trees. I also love poetry. I can't write it, and I'm not really good at doing like poetry readings, but I get visceral reactions and moved by them. And so my process is, I'll have an idea maybe something I read, like a book or something like that. And then I keep a book of poems, things, little snippets of poems that I've read that really move me. And so I'll kind of go through that and see what strikes me. And that helps me direct what my next painting would be and
Mm,
what direction I'd like to take with that.
mm.
I know you had several questions. Where did I
No,
answer?
that's just unfair of me to throw them
I
like Henry Book.
know.
Yeah, I'm still stuck. You said 7 years.
Yes. Mhm. It was long.
Yeah.
But, it was up and down where we thought I was going to be like, I could get out of the house. I could taking my kids um, to Carline, to school and back was a huge deal. And my mother-in-law and my mom, they I'm gonna get all they were amazing. They lived with us during the week. Each one took 1 week on, 1 week off, so they took turns, and Mike had,
Mm,
the weekends. And
yeah.
so we had, again, like I said, the 2-year-old and the newborn, and me sometimes really hanging on, not sure I was gonna make it. So it was
Yeah.
rough.
Yeah. It's amazing. Thank you for giving us a glimpse into that part of your story because sometimes we can think about art or beauty and we think about pretty or we think about that it's not essential. And I think one of the things that you're giving voice to is that there are times that we are in such deep valleys or in places where we do not have words or language that we can articulate, but we can imagine something. We have a cry that comes out that gives us a feeling, and we don't have enough vocabulary to express that, or it's
Absolutely.
beyond our words. And we
Mhm.
go, well, I'm not an artist. What do I do with that? And I think I love hearing your story that it wasn't at 6 years old. It was later in life, at
Hmm.
a stage of life where it maybe was unexpected and it
Mhm.
came from a
Mhm.
really deeply broken place. But beauty is not pretty. Pretty is in
Mhm.
that, but beauty is much deeper. I think we've talked about Aquinas's definition of beauty is really important to V3 and to our team that a thing has integrity. It is what it is. And so if they're tears, they're tears. They're real tears. If it's brokenness, it's real brokenness, and you're honest about that. But a thing has what it is, it's integrity, but it also has harmony, that there's parts and it is poetic, it's musical, it is related to the other. So it may be the cage that holds my body or my body in a cage, but I can't help that I also have a voice to still say I love you. That
Mhm.
is there too. And there's a harmony of those things. And so it's integrity, it's harmony, and then it has a clarity about it, a radiance to it. And so when we say beauty and when we think beauty, I think this is a good invitation for us to kind of go down into the valley and say, no, there's a richness
Mhm.
in beauty
Right.
that isn't
Absolutely.
at the surface, but it's there. It's there
Mhm.
even in those darkest moments. And if
Mhm.
we don't have the language of art to help us, there's another book recommendation, Rembrandt is in the Wind. And the author, Russ Ramsey, does a great job of putting out some of the artists that you would know, Van Gogh, and some of these people who we hear their names, but we don't know their stories. And you get to know them as people. And you just go, I can't imagine the pain that you were facing or the question that you were asking. And now I see. I look at your art and I don't just look at it, now I'm looking through it. And it's a window for me. I think about Monet, even some of the
Mhm.
landscapes, and
Yes.
why were those the vantage points that were being painted? So thank you for that part of your
Mhm.
story. You talked about bees and encaustic art. So we have oil paintings and watercolor and all of these beautiful ways. And encaustic takes color and texture, and it's different because you can touch it. In fact, that was
Yes.
hard for me. You said, I
Mhm.
want you to
Yes.
feel it.
Right.
Tell it before you keep seeing me do this because I'm hinting at it. Um, Before we go into the piece itself, talk about encaustic art. What is it? Give us a definition and maybe a little bit of the history so we can
Sure.
appreciate just how complex it
Mhm.
is.
So, encaustic painting has been around for centuries. It was invented, they think, around 500 BC by the ancient Greeks. And they used to waterproof their ships with wax and tar. And some enterprising artist decided to add some pigment to that and make pretty pictures on the boats. And then it transferred over to walls in people's homes. And the process itself is you take beeswax and tree resin and you melt it so it's molten. And then you take your paintbrush and you dip it in while it's hot and liquid. And then you put the paint or the wax, and it's got pigment in it too. I forgot that part because that makes the color. And so the back in the old days, the pigments were homemade types of things. The process itself is very much like it was centuries ago, with a few little added things like technology. I don't have to have a fire and someone stirring it. I can just plug it in, and I actually use a pancake griddle to keep my wax warm. So what they do is you take your hot wax on a paintbrush and you paint it on a surface, and then after it cools very quickly. And then once it cools, you take a heating implement. I use a blowtorch. You can use different things, but I blowtorch that layer, and it then fuses to the layer beneath it. And so you can play with it. There's transparent paint, and there are pigments, and there's opaque pigments. You can make lots and lots of layers so you can see through it. Some of my pieces, like that one on the wall there, has probably about 30 layers of wax on it. And so if you stand there, you can see way deep in there. There's some flowers all the way at the very back. Then there's some at the front. It's almost like as if you have a camera and your iPhone, and you focus on the very foreground, and then you see the background in like I think they call it a
Portrait.
bokeh or something like
Yeah.
that. It's kind of misty in the back. So that's kind of the techniques you can do. It's also extremely stable. So once it's fused, it's there for good. And one of the reasons they know it's very stable is because archaeologists have discovered the Fayum portraits, and those are named after the place in Egypt where they were found. And there were about 900 of these portraits that they have unearthed. And what happened was, after Alexander the Great had conquered Egypt, there were a bunch of Greek colonists who went over there, and they learned the techniques of mummification, and they married that with their techniques of encaustic. And so what they did was they made these funeral portraits that they made of their loved ones or had commissioned, and then they had placed it on top of the mummy. And so these archaeologists found all of these mummies with these portraits on them, and they are in perfect condition, as if they were
Incredible.
just painted. And it's super cool. So if you head back there, I have a few photocopies of what they look like. And Zach had said one of the things that's super cool about encaustic is, you might not be able to touch a Fayum portrait if you're at the museum, but encaustic is made to be touched. So you feel free, if you see, some of the pieces around, touch it. It has that waxy, silky kind of feel. And if you get close up to it, you could smell the beeswax. It's really cool.
When we unveil this piece, this one was gifted to us by Gina. So V3 owns this one. So you can touch this one all you want. Those on the wall, when she's there to tell you, you can go ahead and touch
I give
them.
you all
Yeah.
permission.
There you
Touch,
go.
touch,
Right.
touch. No licking, though.
It's the one thing. It's some of it. I think it's amazing. What I love about it, I did not know the rich history of this art form. And the more I read about it, the more I get into just seeing the layer and the depth of it. I think, what a remarkable practice.
Yeah,
And the
it's super
time.
cool.
Have you ever fired off an email and you regretted it? You were like, that was too fast, right? Like, I should not have sent that quickly, even if it's punctuation. That's what gets, come back, right? And
Yes.
I can imagine just the practice of having to revisit an idea. Like, I want to put a flower there. Am I sure that I want to put a flower there? And I can keep approaching that flower, but then it changes, then it's different. Maybe it's not a flower, now it's a tree.
Right.
And you're able to revisit it and revisit it and revisit it. I think that's the beauty of that long form, even this conversation, right? We're going to spend 45 minutes or so thinking just about this process. There's something good for us about that. I imagine the process itself brings a lot of joy, brings a lot of healing. What's your favorite moment working? Is it the heated wax? I wish there was a fireplace and like a cauldron.
I know.
That's what I think about. But
Well,
what's your favorite moment working with it?
Well, I think to your point, one of the other authors that we nerded out about was Makoto Fujimura, who wrote Silence and Beauty and several other things, Art and Faith. And he's the author, he's an artist, but he's also the author of the slow art movement.
Mm,
And while encaustic is not as slow as his art form, I think the entire process, it's almost like a ritual.
yeah.
Because you'll see in the room, my palette is cold right now because it's not plugged in, and so it takes about an hour for it to heat up. So I have to plan ahead, I have to plug it in, and then it's up where I paint is in the room above our garage, but I can smell it starting to heat up. So you start out with the senses, and then smell memories are pretty cool. Like
Mm,
it does something to you. And so I think it starts with
mm.
that, and then it kind of gets me in this mindset, and then I start thinking, and it's a slow, holistic process.
Yeah. It's a really rich reminder, too, of just how God's made us to be, right?
Hmm.
And this piece is Awake My Soul, too. But even that, the ability to smell, the ability to
Right.
taste, like how often we're just moving so quickly that these incredible things, not just the fact that we have them, right? We can taste, we can smell, we can hear, but we can do that all in harmony and enjoy it. And then relationally be connected to somebody else and say, oh, you too. It's remarkable.
I think the
And
part that forget about is the enjoyment part. And
yeah.
that's one of the things. It's so easy to just rush through. And I think I know it was terrible being sick, and I would not wish that on anybody, and I certainly would not want to do that again. But Mike and I both agree that there are some amazing lessons that we learned from that. And I think slowing down, being grateful for all the moments, whether good or bad,
Hmm.
but those are super important, and it's hard to stay in that
Yeah.
and remember that. And so things like this, the painting, that helps me try and recapture that or hold on to that.
Yeah. Well, I encourage you. Some of these pieces are for sale. I think all these are.
Yeah.
This one is not, but you can take a piece home tonight. And I think one of the things I love about this particular type of art is that every time you pass by it, it will be a fresh invitation to remember all of those layers of that invitation to slow down, to touch it, to think about it, to return back to it. So thank you. I want to talk about Awake My Soul too.
Hmm.
And I have to watch the clock and manage that. But there's this process is really exciting. So for us as the person commissioning the work, our as I said, our hope, our dream, our big beautiful idea is to express the life and beauty of the gospel, to take these things that can be abstractions, they can be ideas or theories or systematic theology or things we look at. We want to take those and we want to put them back out. Emily Dickinson would say, tell them slant, invite people to look through them again and consider what it is that we share in. And so art allows us to have these conversations in a very, very different way. And so we will find an artist, and Gina is talented, gifted, wise, kind. So already when I was introduced, I was like, this is the type of person. It's not just talent that will produce this type of conversation. It's somebody who has a theological lens, a poetic lens, a lifetime of real lived experience, some very difficult. You know that when you meet an artist, and you had all of that. So from our side, we were like, yes, what an incredible form of art and an artist. But then there's the prompt. And there's this particular idea that we want to bring into the world. And so, what I came with first was I was playing in my mind with this big, big, beautiful idea of kenosis to theosis. And really, all that means is that God's love, like the radicalness of God's love, the kenotic act or the emptying, the self emptying of love is the most beautiful thing. So it's not the fullness necessarily that's most beautiful, but it's the poured out picture that represents the love that poured that out, right? So that's kenosis. And the idea is that anytime there's a kenosis, that there's a theosis, there's theophanies, the appearing of God. So everywhere there's an outpouring of radical love, there, in fact, you've glimpsed a little hint of God, right? That appearing of God in the world. And so I took that to Gina and I said, this kenosis and theosis idea, it's so beautiful that a descent leads to an ascent, right? So something that comes down, you think of Philippians, that God would come all the way down, take on flesh, meet us in the difficult brokenness of our human experience, and then turn that redemptively, that there's this spark right there. And I said, I see it in a particular story. There's a woman who's caught in adultery. And as I imagine this story, there's this incredibly powerful, powerful, but tender moment where this woman is caught in adultery and she's been brought out into a judgmental place where she's being accused of her crime. And there's a beautiful painting actually back on the screen. I used a piece of art from the 1400s that displays that scene. But this scene's been thought about so many times because there's the viciousness of this judgment, but right into that place where there could be certain death, life steps in. And the mercy of God meets and intersects with this person. And I think I've felt that so many times where I know that I am not worthy of someone's goodness or merit, or I haven't merited their mercy or their grace, and yet they give it to you. And I've remembered what it felt like, and I've thought I had a look on my face probably when that person walked away, and I was left stunned by their mercy or their goodness. And I was like, I want to capture that outpouring of love. There's a feeling there of what happens, but it goes even deeper. There's a seed that is planted there where something springs up where there could have been death. So I literally came to you. I took kenosis, theosis, John 8, all this stuff, and I said, what do we do with that? I'm going to hand you the baton and retrace your steps from that initial conversation. How do you take that and then begin? What's your process for starting to put form to an idea?
So one at little tag at the end that Zach had said was that really stuck with me was, what does this woman's life look like after this encounter? And that was something I had never thought about at all. So his prompt kind of turned my perspective around because I'd always read that passage as if it was talking about forgive others or don't be judgmental, and I never really thought about her perspective, and really her story just begins at that point. And so I was thinking about that a little more, and I thought, well, really, that's all of our stories. Just fill in the blank. It's not necessarily adultery; it could be anything, but that's all of our stories.
Yeah.
Once we're touched by God, it's just the beginning. And so again, I think I'd mentioned before, the way I approach something is that I have an idea, and then I have a process of how it comes to fruition. So I was talking with Mike a lot about that, and the thesis that I wanted to convey was that this was a life journey that she was going through. It wasn't just the moment. And the reason why I had asked Zach, that the piece inside there is not encaustic, it's one of my earlier pieces, but I asked if it's okay for me to bring it because that's Awake My Soul 1. And that was painted when I first got out of the house and was able to just start living again. And that reflects the moment, just the moment. And so, I don't know if you all have the same experiences, but that's 10 years ago that I painted that. So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, well, it's really not a moment. It's a journey. It's a lifetime thing. So I thought, well, I really got that wrong, 10 years ago. So 10 years from now, I may look at this piece and think, what was I thinking? But we'll go with it. So I had those ideas of that. I actually had the title before I had the complete image, that I knew this one was going to be Awake My Soul, and this is how I wanted to reflect it. And so I went to my little book of poems, or my quotes that I've collected throughout the years, and one of my favorites is Thomas Merton. He is I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a Trappist monk in Kentucky, I believe it was. And I just really love him. I feel that he is, a lot of his writings, he does poetry and prose, but he came from, like all of us, he's flawed and he embraced that. And so he's relatable. And he also, a lot of his writings, I can relate to his thoughts and his feelings. And again, there's that little gut feeling you get, that little reaction of a visceral reaction where I can't describe how I'm feeling, but I know I'm moved. And so one of the things that I really um, was drawn to was one of his poems. So, but I'm also very nature focused because I feel that if I don't really put a lot of people in my pieces, because I feel like if I did put a figure in there, that maybe somebody wouldn't see themselves in there. Maybe it would only reflect a certain kind of person. But nature is universal. We're all here in this earth and we're here together. And maybe having a piece of art that has some nature in it um, might help. I know it helps me stop and actually see the little dandelion wildflower weeds that are sitting on the side of the road, and they're beautiful. And just to experience that, that's why I, like I said, I tend to do that. So anyway, did I answer your question?
I think so.
I kind of
Yeah.
got lost in the weeds there. Sorry.
Well, I think what's so fun about this, you're going to get to see the piece in just a second, but what's so fun about this is you see the idea, right? And what we're trying to accomplish, even I'm sitting there, kenosis and theosis, and the bigness of God's love, and I see it in this woman's story, and there's a life after that. That's great, but how do we get that to where we can encounter that? And so you intersect with the artist, but then the artist takes that and goes, I think that nature gives us a way to think about that in terms of a journey that produces life. And okay, and then that reminds me of Thomas Merton. And that's what we love about art, right? So here's what we get to do. I want you to hear the poem. And we have the privilege of having a poet on our staff. We're one of the organizations in the world that has a poet on our team. So Wendy Kiefer is right up here. Wendy, say hi. There's Wendy. Wendy just published her inaugural poetry collection, Alchemy of Praise, which you can get over there. Yeah, congratulations, Wendy. But one of the things about poetry is that it moves you. And that's what you had referenced. And this was actually Gina's idea. She said, I could reference the Thomas Merton poem. I could tell the backstory of that, but it won't evoke the same feeling that I was having that led to the painting. Could we read it? And then we were like, well, we could read it for sure. And then she said,
I'm not a poetry reader, so I know my limitations.
She said, you have a poet on your team. Why doesn't she read it?
Yes.
Brilliant idea. So Wendy, would you take us into this Thomas Merton poem, and then we'll jump right back here. This is Wendy Kiefer.
The Sowing of Meanings by Thomas Merton. See the high birds. Is theirs the song that dies among the woodlight, wounding the listener with such bright arrows? Or do they play in wheeling silences, defining in the perfect sky the bounds of, here below, our solitude? Where spring has generated lights of green to glow in clouds upon the somber branches, ponds full of sky and stillnesses, what heavy summer songs still sleep under the tawny rushes at your brim? More than a season will be born here. Nature, in your world of gravid mirrors, the quiet air awaits one note, one light, one ray, and it will be the angel's spring. One flash, one glance upon the shiny pond, and then asperges me, sweet wilderness, and lo, we are redeemed. For like a grain of fire smoldering in the heart of every living essence, God plants his undivided power, buries his thoughts too vast for worlds in seed and root and blade and flower, until in the amazing light of April, surcharging the religious silence of the spring, creation finds the pressure of his everlasting secret too terrible to bear. Then every way we look, lo, rocks and trees, pastures and hills, and streams and birds and firmament, and our own souls within us flash and shower us with light, while the wild countryside, unknown, unvisited of men, bears sheaves of clean, transforming fire. And then, oh, then the written image, schooled in sacrifice, the deep, united threeness printed in our being, shot by the brilliant syllable of such an intuition, turns within and plants that light far down into the heart of darkness and oblivion, dives after and discovers flame.
You. Right? Yeah.
I think you had approval.
Yeah. Good. Amen. Oh. Yeah, for everybody listening to the podcast on Spotify, that was thunder, and that
was
was
pretty
happening.
awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy, for reading. That's what we love, putting poets on our staff for that very reason. Praise God. There's this line: God plants his undivided power. That's what, when I read this, it pinged back to me, and I imagined this woman, and you imagine in the Gospels Jesus writing in the sand, but then I hear Merton's words, and I think he's not just writing, his undivided power like a seed is being planted, and he's saying, no, where there's death, there's life, right here. And he's sinking that deep into the soil. Absolutely. And that's when my imagination, to use Lewis, baptized, and I was like, okay, awake my soul is an organic thing that God did in that moment. It's a journey.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
When you go to put now all of that heart, and there's so much more that you can tell after the podcast, go talk to Gina about it, because there's layer upon layer. But when you turn to a piece like this, then to bring it, what is the first work that you have to do to start to build the foundation for where your imagination wants to go?
You mean technically?
Yeah.
Oh, so you have to kind of sketch it out with charcoal on the base. Wax has to be on a substrate that is rigid, but it also has to be porous, so the wax can sink into it and meld and become one with the actual canvas that you're painting on. And so most often we use wood or cardboard or things like that. But this is a wood panel, and so I kind of sketched out the ideas first in a book. I have like my little, Zach told me to take copious notes for you all. So I have notes and ideas and just sketches on the piece of paper in the notebooks. And then I transferred it over to the canvas. And then you have to start with just the unpigmented layers of wax. And so there's like almost 10 layers of just wax so that you can dig and gouge and carve. Because one of the things I forgot to mention was that encaustic is also kind of like painting married to pottery. So I have a lot of pottery tools that I use, and I carve, and the more you build up, and then you can just gouge into it, and it has a memory and a history, the layers, and you can excavate and bring it back.
I love that. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take this for everybody in the room. Just imagine like the little palate cleanser they give you at a great restaurant. You go, okay, I'm ready. Maybe even do it, but close your eyes for a second and just imagine that undivided power of God being planted like a seed deep into the soil. And once you've done that, you got to open your eyes, because we get to do this together.
Yay!
So, shall we unveil it?
Yeah.
All right. This is Awake My Soul 2. So beautiful. I couldn't wait to do that. It's been since February, right? It's like having a baby. You get to be
It
like,
is.
you did it. It's your baby's beautiful. Okay. This is, you're going to get to come up and actually touch this piece, but we're just, for the last few minutes that we have left, take us through how you developed that idea. The underneath was the wood and the structure and 10 layers, but then you started to put pigment in, and just
Mhm.
talk us through what you took us up into.
So there's, like I said, there's all the different uh, painted, like pigmented wax, but there's also, this is a mixed media piece. That means that there's other things that I've buried into it. So talking about like the excavating, you can kind of bury things in and then bring that back up. Did you want me to talk a little bit about the symbolism
Yes,
and things like
please.
that?
Yep.
Okay, so this is one giant ribbon, and the ribbon is not in a straight line because our paths, our life journeys are not straight. Nothing ever happens in a straight line. So but this is symbolic of her life and all of our lives. It's supposed to start out at, I don't know if you could see it from here, but there's yeah, that part up there, and the idea is that it comes off the canvas and swirls around, and then the remainder of the ribbon is on the canvas. But it starts out, and that piece up there is gauze and muslin, and it's symbolic of a burial shroud, because that woman was dead basically, and Jesus resurrected her, or he prevented her death. He prevented her from dying. Oops, this, sorry. And so it swings around. It's dirty. It's just full of just all of the yuck that she's got. And as we come down to where Zach is, I've buried again that muslin cloth, but I'm going to do a little show and tell here. I did some embroidery on it, and so it's when you put wax on it, it's firm, but this is a nod to what's called cantha embroidery. Cantha embroidery is a centuries old embroidery technique that was typically and still is used in India. A lot of the times by people who are on the margins of society, the poor. A lot of times now they're doing it with people who've been rescued from trafficking, and they take old and discarded fabrics and they bring them back to life. They make napkins and towels and just different things. And it's so you could look it up. It's Kantha, Kantha. It's really amazing. But that's a nod to those ladies in the margins of society. As we come up here, you see little bits and pieces and fragments of flowers as we're starting to come back to life and become a new person, a new creation of who we are supposed to be. As we get to where Zach is, there's another little hidden gem inside, and those are, and you can touch this. Remember, when you're up here, these are tea bags that I sewed together, and these are embroidered in with grapevines, and that's a nod to people, these women who were Jewish Italians, and for centuries they've been making Torah skirts covers for the Torah scrolls. And the women in these communities are revered and honored. And they, again, are it's a different set of women, but they're being elevated and they're really honored. Like I said, they have prayers to these that are asking for to bless the hands of these women. As you get over here where the flowers and the birds are, I have a soft spot for birds and bird song, because when I was sick, I forgot what it sounded like. And one of my first memories of being out of the house was just taking my dog to the side of the yard just so he can go potty. And I heard the birds sing, and I thought, oh my gosh, it's been so long. But even before, I was thinking, before I was sick, I don't even remember stopping to listen. I was probably doing my grocery list in my head and never really heard that. So to me, birds are, it's a wonderful way to be in the moment, to celebrate the joy. They're so joyful, and to be grateful. And it's also a sign of new life. So you see the birds here, and the also, I forgot, Zach had given another prompt, was Psalm 108, which was talking about singing and joy. So that was a nod to that. And as we get closer to the middle, buried in here is what is that? Frankincense and myrrh. So they're like nuggets. They're actually before it's been ground. And so for those were 2 of the 3 gifts that Jesus was given when at his birth by the Magi. And so it's a nod to him, and that we are just constantly refined. And the future, you could see that the rest of the ribbon is just undeveloped because we just don't know what our future is like, but we know that we're not alone.
Gina, my mind goes back to just the warming up of that
I know.
pancake griddle, right?
Yeah.
And then the house starts to smell, and you say, I'm in this part of the story.
Yeah.
And it takes so much time for them to turn around this way. This is what we mean when we say we want art to be something that, and beauty to invite us to look through it. And thank you for sharing this time with us. And Gina, thank you for giving us a glimpse, not just into your story, but into how a process like this unfolds, because it's so easy for us to admire the technical aspects of how difficult it is to create each part of that. But knowing the materials and the poems behind it and the prayers, it's extraordinary.
Oh,
So
thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
The artist is Gina White. The piece is Awake My Soul Too. And Gina, we set out to express the life and beauty of the gospel, and you've done it magnificently. So thank you.
Thank you.